started working for DoorDash shortly before the pandemic hit, about 2.5 years ago, and at first I loved it. I was fresh out of high school and earning a decent amount of money making deliveries throughout Brooklyn and the surrounding boroughs. The best part of the job was being able to set my own hours, and since I had nothing better to do, I just worked as much as I could and earned as much as I could while it was possible. The only reason I stopped was that I lost my car and couldn't afford to get a new one without getting a different, less mobile job. You see, I was doing my usual routine and waiting for an order to be placed that I could pick up and make a couple of dollars. And when an order finally came through, I was quick to snatch it and begin making my way to the pickup location. It was a pizza place that I was familiar with, so finding parking to pick up the food wasn't an issue at all. And by the time it was ready to be picked up, I was there grabbing it. I made my way back to my car as fast as I could, letting the person who ordered the pizza know that their food was picked up and on the way. I looked at my phone and saw that the delivery was to an apartment building a couple blocks over, and in no time, I was en route with the food. It took me about 6 minutes to get to the block that the apartment building was located on, and luckily for me, street parking wasn't too bad at that time of day, and I managed to find a spot that was right next to the building. Now this was a no-contact delivery, which meant that I was to leave the food at the door, take a picture of it, notify the person who ordered the food that their pizza was downstairs, and then they were responsible for coming to get it. So I walked up to the door and placed the food in a safe spot, and as I was taking my phone out of my pocket, I noticed a group of young men who looked to be no older than 16 down on the corner. I couldn't help but notice they all kept looking over at me. Now in my mind, I figured that they were just thinking about trying to take the food, so I wasn't concerned for my safety at all, and I continued about my business. I took my phone out and began taking a picture of the food, and then I even called the number that I was given for the person who ordered the food to let them know that their food was downstairs. I didn't want them to miss out on any of the delicious pizza. As I hung up the phone, I took another look down the corner of the block, and this time I saw the entire group had been staring my way. I'm not sure why, but this made me feel really uneasy, and I figured that it was time for me to go. As I went to turn toward my car, out of my peripheral vision, I could see the group had started moving. They were heading toward me. Again though, in my head, these kids just wanted the food, so I tried not to freak out and continued heading to my car. That was when I heard it. One of the young men yelled out to me, "Hey mister." I tried to ignore it, but then I heard it again. "Hey mister, hang on a minute." To this day, I'm not sure why, but I stopped in my tracks and turned to face the group that was trying to get my attention. As I turned though, I quickly learned what their intentions were. As soon as I was facing them, I heard 3 sounds that almost sounded like small fireworks popping off. And at the same time, I saw 3 muzzle flashes from a small handgun that one of the teenagers was carrying. I didn't feel anything at first, but when my leg buckled underneath me, I looked down and knew right away that I had been hit. I fell to the floor and the pain began to kick in. I screamed out for help, thinking that surely I was about to be killed for some unknown reason. I was somewhat thankful, however, when the group ran past me and straight to my car, which still had the keys inside. I heard the sound of people around me screaming as the car pulled off. The person who had ordered the food had come outside by that point, and they were the ones who called the ambulance for me. I never got that car back, but thankfully, I was still able to walk after all was said and done, and I definitely learned a lesson about being aware of my surroundings. Growing up in a small town in Colorado, there weren't a ton of options for work as a 19-year-old who didn't go to college. So when I got my license, I ended up grabbing a job for one of the local diners that I used to love eating at. They had a delivery position, and I also bussed tables when there were no orders to be delivered. The radius for delivery wasn't too large, only about 3.5 miles. But considering the area around the town was mostly mountainous woods, some deliveries could take nearly 40 minutes. This wasn't a problem though. I loved driving, and I loved all the scenery around me as I made my deliveries. One night, However, Mother Nature showed me how truly terrifying she could be. What happened was that the diner got a delivery order, and right away I recognized the address. It was one of our regulars, and after their food was made, it would only be a 15-minute drive for me. When I got in my car, I didn't even have to use the GPS because I knew the exact house I was going to. It was a small, single-story house that was in the middle of the woods. I loved this house's long gravel driveway. I would always see small critters like squirrels and other animals running through the trees and along the stone wall that lined the path. The driveway would then open up to an area that had room for about 4 cars to park in, which I love because they only ever had 1 car in the driveway, so I had enough space to simply turn around instead of having to reverse and make a K-turn. As I made my way down the driveway that evening, I was surprised that I didn't see any animals scurrying around, but I figured since it's getting cold again, it was just that time of year. So I drove all the way down the driveway and pulled in front of the house. As I got out of the car, I couldn't help but feel like someone or something was staring at me. I just brushed it off as the owner looking out of their window though, and continued around my car to the passenger side to get the food. As I'm leaning into the passenger side of the car, I heard the sound of something moving around behind me. I stood up straight and quickly turned to see what it was, but there was nothing there. I shrugged and continued to get the food out of my car. This time though, as I was closing the passenger door, I heard what was an unmistakable, deep, growling noise coming from the trees. I tried my best to look into the dark forest where the noise was coming from. As I slowly backed toward the house, that was when I saw it. A medium-sized black bear came running out of the woods. I could hear the snarling coming from it with each step it took. I turned and sprinted toward the house. And when I reached the steps, I didn't waste time knocking. I grabbed the handle and thankfully, the door was unlocked so I was able to rush inside. I apologized to the homeowners for barging in like that, but once they looked out their window, they understood. To this day, I still don't think that bear was trying to attack me. If it wanted to get me, it was more than fast enough. If I had to guess, it probably had cubs nearby and was trying to scare me off. Still, I'll never forget the look of those teeth as they charged toward me. Working as a driver for DoorDash has been a pretty good side job ever since I moved to Converse, Texas. I mainly pick up deliveries inside of San Antonio, but sometimes I will find ones that take me out of Converse and a bit into the country. Now, I used to not mind those deliveries, and I would pretty much accept any job that I could handle, but after this one incident that brought me to a Texas ranch, I will no longer go outside of the cities of Converse and San Antonio. It was around 8:30 p.m., and I picked up an order that brought me out to the middle of nowhere. That's the crazy thing about Texas. 1 second, you can be in a big city, and the next, there is practically nothing around you for miles. As I drove around looking for the entryway onto this massive property, I began following a large fence that ran alongside the street. I figured the fence would eventually lead me to the entryway, and I was correct. I pulled into a small driveway that led me to a large electric gate with a number pad that required a code to get in. I wasn't given a code, so I decided to contact the person who sent out the order. They responded within a minute with a text that read, "The code, pound 6660. Welcome to the family." I was confused by that last line, but I leaned out of my car window and punched in the code, chuckling to myself at the fact that they used 666 for a code. After a second, the gate made a loud banging sound and then slowly slid open across rust-covered tracks. The gate opened to reveal a long, winding pathway with trees lining both sides of it. They must have been planted there by the owners a while back because they looked oddly out of place compared to the barren fields that surrounded the ranch. I began to make my way down the driveway, and I couldn't help but shake the creepy feeling that was coming over me. I was on edge, which I'm glad for because as I rounded one of the small bends, in the middle of the driveway, my headlights revealed a tall, pale man wearing a dirt-covered black suit. We stared at each other for a moment without either of us moving. I was in shock. Eventually, I got the courage to roll my window down a bit and yell out, "Did you order the takeout?" But he didn't answer. All he did was step to the side and point down the driveway, as if telling me to continue. Reluctantly, I did. I continued down the pathway, and behind every couple of trees, I can't help but think that I see more people dressed up in a similar suit as the man who had been standing in the driveway. Still, I continued on. Finally, I could see a house in front of me, but as if it was something out of my worst nightmare. Standing on the porch of the large house and along the outside of the driveway were at least a dozen or more men, all dressed in dirt-covered suits, some black and some gray. I froze. I didn't know what to do, but I knew for a fact that nothing could make me get out of my car at that moment. After sitting in the driveway, staring at the group of strange men, I noticed that one of them had something in their hand. My eyes widened as I realized what it was, and I quickly threw the car into reverse. One of the men on the porch was carrying a rifle of sort. I wasn't close enough to see what kind it was, but I knew it was a firearm of some sort. I slammed my foot on the gas and began swinging my car around in reverse to turn around so that I could drive out of there as fast as I could. At that point, I noticed a few of the men now begun walking toward my car. After fully turning around, I put my car into drive and began flooring it. I let out a scream as I heard a loud bang followed by my rear windshield shattering. I leaned forward and made my head as low as possible while still being able to see over the dashboard. As I made my way down the driveway, every tree that I passed, I could see a man stepping out from behind it and walking toward the path that I had been driving down. Luckily, none of them seemed to be armed. I made it out of the driveway and onto the road, and as I passed the still open gate, I noticed that it began to close. They were trying to trap me inside with them. I sped down the road and called 911 as I made my way to the police station and explained to them what just happened to me. They were confused when I told them the address because they were familiar with it, and it had apparently been an abandoned property for the past decade. By the time the officers made it to the ranch, however, they said it appeared to still be abandoned and there was no one around. 3 hours after I finally got home, around 2:30 a.m., I received a text message saying, "Where'd you go? It was just getting fun." That was the last time I ever took an order outside of the city.